You're listening to the Veterinary Innovation Podcast.
You're listening to the Veterinary Innovation Podcast. My name is Shawn Wilkie, and along with my awesome co-host, we interview the innovators in this space every week. Ivan, why don't you go ahead and introduce today's guest for the second time?
Well, I'm glad you said that, Shawn. So my name is Ivan Zach, and I'm happy to introduce Dr. Aaron Massecar. And the reason why Shawn said for the second time, because for the first time we did an awesome interview with Aaron, and we were so excited about it. We forgot one little detail. We forgot to record it. We also were too scared to tell him, so we were hiding for about a couple months and then sent our podcast guru to just reset a new appointment. So my apologies, but on the other side, I'm super happy to talk to you again and to have you on the show.
Welcome back, Aaron.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
So a couple of things about Aaron. What we know is that he is an assistant director of education at the Translational Medicine Institute at Colorado State University. He was involved with the innovation and technology as an advisor group member of the College of Veterinarians of Ontario. And he was a program manager of the second year of Veterinary Innovation Summit. He also is involved in Veterinary Innovation Council, specifically around telemedicine initiative. He holds the degree of doctorate in philosophy from the University of Guelph, written a book on philosophy, and enjoys hiking in the Colorado mountains. So welcome back again. Let's jump in and talk about how does the philosophy major, doctorate, transforms into veterinary medicine and then leads the innovation in the industry.
So first off, I just want to say that I'm not upset at all about the fact that we get to talk again. I rarely ever see you guys, and so it's great to be able to have another conversation with you. So, if you don't record this one as well, we'll just have to do it again, and perhaps in person. And philosophy and theoretical discussions are usually done best over beer, so that can happen too.
True.
But since we are recording, getting into it a little bit. So it really started because I was working with Dr. Adam Little. He needed some help just with writing. So writing and grammar, and I had been working at Writing Services for 7 years. And so we had a few conversations. We got along really well. And he was doing a lot of consulting work. He was doing some consulting work down in Texas. And then he started talking with a wonderful woman, Dr. Mia Carey, who was in charge of the Veterinary Innovation Council at the time. And they needed somebody just to come in and kind of help structure things a little bit. So they were going to do a program on telemedicine. That was one of the things that was really impacting the industry. It wasn't really clear what impact that was, who the major players were, all of the little bits and pieces of it. So they needed somebody to come in and just help run the program. It wasn't really to set direction or anything like that, but just to try to make sense of things. And that's where I think philosophy has come in and helped me more than anything else, is just trying to make sense of things, right? Telemedicine is this big, messy beast. What's the difference between telemedicine and telehealth and virtual care? What does that mean for the practitioner? What are the regulatory questions? All of these things kept coming up again and again, and there weren't clear answers on them. And so I just tried to take all the information that was out there and try to make sense of it. And as a result, I think things were able to move forward, and I'm not going to say that, I'm going to take credit for what happened in the industry because it's a giant thing that was happening, but I was really proud to be able to just be one voice in there trying to help practitioners move forward.
It's really interesting, Aaron. I mean, I guess our relationship probably dates back to that second year when you helped with the Veterinary Innovation Summit. I think it's actually where Ivan and me got to meet each other and spend a lot of time with each other. And that is just such a great smashing together of atoms of all of the people in the industry talking about the veterinary space in an interesting and innovative way. A lot of the people that we've had on our show are people that we've met at that summit. And I would be interested to just hear from your point of view how that summit has kind of morphed and grown and what your involvement's been like in it. I think a lot of our listeners are probably unaware of what it even is. So why don't you go ahead and dig into that a little bit for us?
Yeah. So similar story. So Adam was down at Texas and he was working with Dean Green And Adam had, I don't want to make this whole thing about Adam. I don't know if you guys have interviewed Adam yet, but he definitely should be on the podcast. But he had not a fantastic experience when he was going through vet school, because he had all these great ideas. He went to Singularity. He saw the future of veterinary medicine. And there weren't a lot of people that were getting together and having these conversations. And so I think that that's where things really started, was just, let's get the people together who are passionate about the future, and not just passionate, but optimistic about the future. What does that look like? What are the new technologies? How are we using software to enable a better communication platform with our clients? Like, all of these things that were happening in the profession, nobody was bringing all of them together. And so that was the starting point. And I was a little bit on the periphery of it. So I was helping a little bit organize it, but it really was set down by Dean Eleanor Green, who took a chance on Adam, and then Adam, who said, nobody else is doing this. This is a major need within the profession. We've got to get these people together, because if we don't, then they're just going to keep getting swallowed up in major conferences, right? You go to a conference with, 18 or 20,000 people, and it's hard to connect with those people who are I'm not going to say like thought leaders, but very passionate about where that thought is going, right? And then you bring them together and see what happens. The other thing that he did was bringing in people who were a little bit on the periphery. So all of those startups who weren't normally having conversations with the general population within veterinary medicine, giving them an opportunity to talk about how they see the profession. And it started really transforming from just, a bunch of like people on the periphery to having a central conversation, to all of a sudden talking about new business models, trends with software, trends with the market shifts and the changing demographics, bringing in corporate consolidators who aren't normally having conversations. And so we keep trying to bring in people who are on the periphery, who are having an impact on the profession, but not part of the main conversation, and trying to bring them all together to say, let's talk about this stuff. Because if veterinarians don't take a leadership role when it comes to bringing those people in, there's going to be huge missed opportunity, because there is a possibility of displacement in certain respects. And so it's that, right? Like, how do we keep bringing in people from the outside into the center and making them part of the conversation? That's been going well for the past few years. I don't think it's going to slow down anytime soon at Texas A&M. When I moved up here to Colorado, we just had a trial run in September of last year. And it's amazing, like the community that has already been built around this stuff. So anyone who's interested in thinking about these big ideas, strongly recommend that you would come to one of these summits, because the people there are just awesome.
Yeah, it's so cool. And, I was so inspired because I was in sort of the growing phase of SmartFlow then. And then when I came in, when you're trying as a veterinarian transition from that to building something, you just don't know where to meet people. Mm-hmm. And that's really the most important thing in building something, is networking. And there was such a pool of people. And and it was interesting that, you sit in the audience and you listen to like a talk from, CEO of IDEX. At the same time, you're sitting next to Chief Marketing Officer of Banfield. It completely changes the perspective of how people communicate, and it gets everybody together to kind of share ideas, learn new things, and network. So that's a really great event. Can you explain to the listeners and myself, the Veterinary Innovation Council and Veterinary Innovation Summit? First of all, are they connected, and how are they connected? Is one is the event for the other, or they're just sort of, working together? And then also a little more detail about the actual Veterinary Innovation Council. I know that you're big on telemedicine initiative in there, but what other things in the council happening? How can we join? How can we participate? And what are the initiatives that people can take part in?
Yeah, so it's been 8 or 9 months, well, maybe even closer to a year now, since I left the Innovation Council when I came here to CSU. So I could talk about what happened while I was there, and then how things have continued to evolve since then. So that relationship between the Veterinary Innovation Council and the Veterinary Innovation Summit is a pretty close one. From the very beginning, it started with an idea between Dean Green and Adam. And then from there it grew, and we started looking at who else would be interested in this area. And so that's when the Innovation Council came on. And it was really through that relationship with NAVC. So NAVC has some level of oversight over the Innovation Council, but it's pretty autonomous, but there is a relationship there. So it was started because similar to the Innovation Summit, there was no group who was tackling these industry-wide issues. Things like telemedicine, things like the Veterinary Nurse Initiative, things like corporate consolidation. Nobody's like taking a look at these issues. So that's where it started. And then there was clear alignment from the very beginning between the Innovation Council and the Innovation Summit. And so they've been a strong supporter of it, helping with the program, helping recruit sponsors. So there's a lot of work that they do there. It definitely started at Texas A&M, but it was from the very beginning very strongly supported by the Innovation Council and NAVC. So what are they doing? The major focus that they had when I started there was telemedicine, and that was the thing that was we were supposed to work on, and that's primarily what I worked on for 2 years, was just understanding who the companies are, understanding what the use cases are, the business model behind it, all of that. So that progressed. And then we started looking at some other issues. So some of those things that I mentioned before, like the Veterinary Nurse Initiative, what is the impact on the profession? How do we move this forward? How do we support the right groups? There was some work that was done on the opioid problem. So trying to make some sense of that, what exactly was happening and how was it happening? There's a lot of different projects that were kind of smaller projects. In terms of specifically what they're working on today, I don't know for sure. I just haven't kept in strong contact with them, which is primarily my fault. It's an amazing organization of like really just phenomenal people. When I was the executive director of that, and I got to sit in the room with some of those people that you were talking about, like major players within the industry, it was such an enriching experience. So where are they going in the future? I think still very much supporting the Innovation Summit, but the specific projects aren't entirely clear to me.
That's great. It's really also interesting too, Aaron, like your involvement in this industry has, I think, created a bit of a smokescreen, which made me think that you were always a veterinarian. It's, I always saw Dr. Aaron Massecar, and I was like, geez, I wonder where he practiced vet medicine. I wonder where he studied. And, I remember when we had you on the podcast the first time, which nobody got to listen to except for the three of us. We kind of dove into that, and I always thought that was really interesting because of your involvement with NAVC and then the various events that you put on that I've been a part of. It's been really interesting. And so one of the questions that's kind of stuck with me from the first recording is like, where do you see innovation going inside veterinary medicine, and what really gets you excited in this industry?
Yeah, it's been really interesting to watch things evolve, even the short amount of time that I've been involved in the industry. And where do I see things going in the future? I think one of the things that telemedicine has taught us more than anything else is that we need to start thinking a little bit differently about how people are practicing medicine. There's kind of this assumption that good medicine is good medicine, and everything else doesn't really matter. And to a large degree, that's the way that veterinarians seem to be taught in school, is like, know the medicine, know the medicine, know the medicine. And then there's some conversations around things like soft skills and that kind of stuff. And so there are like elective courses that people can take, but there isn't a strong emphasis on that. And I think what telemedicine is doing is saying like, look, there are these huge market shifts that are happening that are specifically because the consumers' demands are changing. They want different things. And so I think that more people are starting to pay attention to what those market shifts are and how they could have a major impact. So even things like, Rover getting a certain amount of funding, I think it was like 125 million or something like that. These huge funding opportunities, like where is that coming from? And it's really being driven by the consumer. And now telemedicine in a lot of ways is being driven by the consumer because they have basic questions that they're not getting answers for. And so they're looking for those answers from somewhere, and they're changing the way that the market is evolving. So I think people are starting to pay more attention now to those consumers. Where will that go in the future? Well, you can already see the evolution of corporate practices, right? Like you have these great practices that are being built with all sorts of things like digital radiology and new tools and alternative medicine and all that stuff. But all of that is increasing the average client transaction in a way that is kind of creating a space at the lower end of the market where people don't necessarily need all of those higher end activities. And so corporate practices like Thrive are thriving, right? So you have these low cost clinics that are opening up all over the place that make it really easy for people to engage. And that is specifically addressing a need that's in the market. And so people are starting to pay attention to that. It's not necessarily the veterinarians who are leading that, but they're definitely part of that conversation, right? So I think that is definitely changing. And so it's just a matter of listening to who the customers are. And that, I think there's more of that that's happening now. So the thing that gets me really excited is I see education as a solution for so many of the problems that exist across the profession. Education is too expensive. That's just a fact. And it's not sustainable, this constant trajectory that we're on. At the same time, we have in the continuing education market a mode of delivery that is not at all evidence-based. And so if you look at the evidence for things like a 50-minute lecture and 5 quiz questions, which is your standard continuing education requirement, there's no evidence for saying that that's actually a good way to learn. So there's some serious problems that exist in that area. And I think that there's a huge opportunity for people to have a major impact just by doing things like understanding that if you have a chunk of information and it's given to you at one point in time, that short-term memory does not lead to long-term memory. And so it's spacing out the educational experience. So instead of like going into a 50-minute lecture in the dark cavernous lecture theaters, can you have a little bit of information up front, a good discussion about that information, and then thinking about implementation strategies afterwards? Even that simple idea of just like a hybrid version of education can fundamentally change the way that people are being educated in the continuing education space. And I'm really excited to be working with people who are trying to bring that about.
That's very interesting, but that also leads, those two components that you just discussed, the changing customer and the changing, patterns of how people learn things, but also leads to, I think, that the profession changes as well. And that is a big driver behind it, the innovation, what you see, because more and more, I think one of the examples of that is that you don't anymore become a doctor for life or a lawyer for life, or, people go into these careers that used to be you're a vet and then you graduate as a vet, you work as a vet, and then you die as a vet. And then, and then I think that, I kind of jumped out of that loop. I think that in my mind, every profession has about like a 10-year run, and then you hit the ceiling, and then you need to do something else or do it in a different way. So I think that the veterinarians, the new generation of even just students, they consume information in a different way. They have different values, and it's not only millennials, but it's, the people don't want to die at work. They want to live a life, and then work is to just supplement the life. And I think that changes how we're going to practice vet medicine as well. And I think that in combination of how consumers want to receive services, those are the two drivers that change and create innovation in this space. The question that I have, if you agree with my sort of statement about the changing of how vets want to practice, is that balanced right now? Are new technologies and innovation are supporting both ends of the environment, or is it imbalanced right now? We're focusing too much on the consumer, but not so much on veterinarian. Can you maybe comment on that?
Yeah, so that's really interesting. Do I think that there's a balance there between the two? I don't know. I might get some flack for saying this, but the amount of money that veterinarians are currently getting as starting salaries is disproportionately high, right? Like, I'm seeing a lot of vet students come out and they haven't even graduated yet, and they're getting offers for $110,000 to $130,000 as a starting salary, right?
Wow.
That's awesome. Like, that's awesome. And the amount of debt that they're carrying, they really need that kind of salary in order to offset the debt. And a big driver for that is corporate consolidation and the opening of new practices, right? And so people are like complaining about corporate consolidation and stuff. And it's like, where do you think that competition for your abilities is coming from? It's coming from new practices that are emerging in the market. And so you can criticize it all you want, but you're taking advantage of it every time that you get a pay raise, right?
It's interesting. I think this is a great opportunity for audience participation. So if anybody wants to roast Aaron for saying that, like, please do it publicly on our Facebook page or anywhere we have stuff. Thanks for bringing it up, Aaron. He's in Colorado. But no, it's just, it's interesting, all the change. And he'll be at NAVC in just a couple of days. So this won't come out in time for you to give me face-to-face. It's too bad. But no, it's interesting. And there's so many different levers and knobs that are being turned in the veterinary space right now, technology being used to solve problems in a way that was never even thought about before, corporate consolidation really coming together in North America like it has in Europe 5 to 10 years ago. There's so many of these different levers that are being turned in this industry, low-cost care, different methods of care being delivered. And you do bring up some incredibly interesting points. I feel as if I'm listening to a philosophical major speak to us, and these conversations. Even Ivan, you're asking very difficult questions. So it's been so much fun. It's been so much fun, but we've got to turn this one off because otherwise we're going to be here for a couple of hours. And so, Aaron, the way that we typically like to close out the show is asking a couple of questions. So the first one is, anybody else we should interview on the show? Any colleagues or people that you've worked with that you're like, they're so innovative, you need to get them on the show? We've already got Adam Little, so we're going to add him to the list. But do you have any other people that you think that me and Ivan really should try to have this kind of chat with?
There's a ton of amazing people. So I would say definitely the Trimbles. So Rob and Jess Trimble, they were instrumental in building up Fuzzy Pet Health from the very beginning. So definitely talking with them. People like Caleb Frankel would be amazing, and what he's been able to do and continues to do with Instinct software. Guys like Lance Rosa is awesome. And then there's a bunch of people who are just amazing. And when I work with them, because so we built something called the Veterinary Entrepreneurship Academy while we were at Texas A&M as well, and that we can have another conversation about that. But I got exposed to so many just amazing people who are going to have a major impact on the profession. And they're so young and they're so enthusiastic. I feel like in a lot of ways, vet school beats that enthusiasm out of you, but they maintained it all the way through. Like people like Kate McDaniel. She's awesome. She's working for Banfield right now. She started a company with a friend of hers while she was in school. And I think that she's just awesome. Yeah, there's a ton of people out there who are doing such amazing things. I think it would almost be better just to have a list of those people that everyone can follow, right? Like even if you put that on Facebook and just say, look, you want to know what's going on in the profession, just follow these people. They're probably on social media. Let's build a community through social channels, right? Because there's just so many really, really good people. Mia Carey, if you haven't interviewed her, she's awesome. Yeah,
great.
So tons of great.
But yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think we'll work on that. We'll do some public posting and compile a list and just show to our listeners. Yeah, show our listeners who and what's out there. Last question for you: most impactful book, TED Talk, piece of media that you'll send our listeners to?
I think along the lines of what we were talking about before of, trying to think about what the customer wants and what the customer needs. A book that's been really interesting that's been out for a long time, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And it's awesome because it's a super deceiving cover of the book, right? You would think, oh, I'm type A, I like controlling people. This is going to teach me how to control people, right? And it's really not about that. It's about subordinating your own interests to the interest of other people or finding some shared ground and then moving forward based on that. And I think if people adopted that kind of mindset, that would really help to drive a lot of change forward. I'm going to cheat and give you two more. Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman is such a good book for understanding the mistakes that we constantly make in all of our decision making. And then some Aristotle would be really good. Nicomachean Ethics would be awesome. Not metaphysics, it's a bit much for people, but getting into the ethics would be really good, just in case people are feeling a little nutty.
Thank you so much for listening to the Veterinary Innovation Podcast. If you want to hear about our new episodes, please follow us on any social media channel. Also, you can check out our website at veterinaryiinnovationpodcast.com. See you next week.